Boom.
Boom.
And we're live.
We're live. We're doing this thing. All right.
We're absolutely doing this. You have to leave this part in, by the way.
This is just how
This
it
is for
opens.
Patreon only. This is for Patreons only.
This part is what opens. It's like what plays before I play the theme. Okay, so welcome to the inaugural episode of the DMC AdviceCast. This is going to be a podcast where me and two of my DM buddies kind of give advice on how to run games, how to make content for games, and kind of social etiquette at the table as well. It'll be a kind of serious podcast in that we'll be giving actual advice, but we're going to make a lot of goofs. Because that's who we are as people, and we could not possibly get through an entire podcast without just absolutely dunking on somebody. So,
I mean, I don't dunk on people unless they really deserve it.
oh yeah, we'll very rarely dunk on actual people unless they super deserve it. My name is Mike. I've been a DM for 12 years now. Jesus Christ. My specialty kind of is especially D&D 3.5 and 5e, but my specialty when it comes to running games is, I would say, a balanced game between role-playing and combat, and I tend to run really lore-intensive custom worlds. I think I'm kind of the closest we'll get to a stereotypical like heavy nerd DM as far as like lore wise custom worlds, and I tend to like,
give me your lunch money.
I tend to like the crunchy bits.
I'm Emily. I've been DMing, I don't even know how long. I started when I was very, very little for my cousins and siblings. Elementary school age, so probably close to 2 decades off and on now. I also have played a lot. I am one of those people who likes all the systems. So I've played, Dungeons and Dragons, Shadowrun, and like a ridiculous number of like just indie game systems, particularly now. So I've had a long history with role-playing and various tabletop RPGs, but I've definitely mostly played and run homebrew. That are sort of flavored by other worlds. I draw inspiration from pretty much everywhere. I also like to do fantasy cartography in my spare time.
Yeah, you do.
I am a map obsessed person, so I make a lot of maps and sometimes for games, and sometimes just because I want to make a map, and they never get seen by anyone else. And for my GM style, I actually tend to prefer the rules light systems. I'm very much a storytelling GM, and I'm what I would call a reactive GM, as in I really like to react to what my players are making. I also tend to ascribe to a more collaborative world building style, where I have a idea, a tone, and a flavor for a world, and then I solicit other ideas that build onto that world from my players as I go.
Yeah, and I'm Bobby, and I run a game where a session recently concluded with everyone chanting "Drink the Ghost."
Jesus! I was wondering if this was going to be a family-friendly podcast. And I might just
Were you?
I might just beep that out. I haven't decided yet.
Yeah, so I have less of a DMing history than the other two. I've been running my oldest game for, I guess, like over a year and a half now, which is weird. But yeah, I've also run like I tend to run like a few like smaller systems as well. And my current like big game is Pathfinder, which is odd because I tend to like not actually go for the crunch that much. So that's been an experience, but I also tend towards like little like smaller systems as well. I do tend to do more like role-playing base. I tend to be less about combat, at least partially because like my players seem to enjoy it less than shopping for 3 sessions in a row. But yeah.
Okay. So this podcast will be apparently either on the explicit tag or I'm going to have to beep out, which is fine. I don't mind swearing. Like, we're going to swear, and if I decide I want it not explicit, I'm just going to put in beeps, which only really adds to the comedy sometimes.
Yeah, especially if it's not clear exactly what you've bleeped out.
Yeah. Like, if I have to beep out the word...
Because I imagine if you bleep out ghost, it's not going to be obvious what was there.
Oh, I'm going to leave in ghost. You know I'm going to leave in ghost. They're going to be really confused.
Oh, for sure. It's going to be ghost. Beep. Yeah. And it's like, okay, what was there?
It's going to be ghosted like a recording of my kitten yawn. I know your fucking game.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Oh, why not? Oh.
All right.
Crush my hopes and dreams, why don't you?
All right, so I'm going to cut all of that conversation we just had out. Mostly so I don't have to beep out the word like 4 times. All right, so this podcast is going to be mostly an advice podcast. I have some other ideas for some segments I want to do, possibly reviewing systems, especially as they get released, or newer systems. Specifically, I'm thinking things like Overlight, reviewing the Fate Core system, which isn't brand new, but it is kind of newish to the scene. And kind of reviewing D&D books as they come out. That might just be a me thing, where I kind of just go off for a segment, and the other two are like, ooh. But
Ooh.
Yeah, so we'll see.
So that's what we'll have to deal with next session.
Yeah.
Oh no.
But yeah, so the first episode's going to be just advice. So yeah, let's get into the first question. Our first question comes from an anonymous user on Tumblr who asks, I have a history of making large and detailed world maps, but I continually butt up against the same roadblock in world building. Cities. How do you go about mapping and planning cities of different sizes for your games? So we do have someone who just loves doing this. So we're going to get just the highlights from her.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll work better. It'll probably end up working better if we all sort of talk about it together anyways.
Yeah, for sure.
So feel free to butt in. But I think the first thing you want to do, if you're going to be making a city, is the same thing that you do for anything you're going to be making for your RPG, for running. Why are you making this settlement? You really want to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this city for me? Is it something that the players are going to come to and shop and stay for the night and leave? If that's the case, you really don't have to put a whole lot of time and effort into making the city. Treat it like an NPC that you expect the players to meet, buy some stuff from, and leave. As in, make up 2 to 3 details that make it distinct, provide a couple services they're probably going to need, and don't worry about it past there. If it's somewhere you want a whole bunch of adventures or an adventure arc set in, that's when you actually want to do a little bit more planning and actually maybe map it out. But I also want to say that unless you actually enjoy mapping, you don't actually have to make a map for your city to run it.
Yep.
Like, don't be afraid to... I don't want to call it procedurally generate, but it's kind of what I do sometimes when my players stop into a town is I might have some random notes about, like, this is what's not there. Like, something that they might find essential
for sure.
that's not there. But other than that, I kind of let them try and find a place or figure out if a place is there, and then just use a random name generator for things.
Hell yeah.
Or have a list.
Random name generator, or if you don't like having a random name generator right away, I actually have a list of random buildings and random NPCs that I can stick anywhere. So if somebody is like, oh, I want to go visit a blacksmith. And I'm like, well, I didn't think of a blacksmith. Well, I've got an NPC in this list that would work. I'll put that person in as a blacksmith.
Yeah.
And voila.
So
you don't have to plan it all out.
Than random name generators at the table, because you don't get random rude words from it.
The other thing I would do is if you decide you do want to plan this city because you are going to be running a full arc in it, is once you've asked the why you're making this city, what kind of arc are you running in it, what you want that to guide is what are the things you actually need to have planned in it. Because you don't want to plan the entire city. You really don't. Even if you're doing a detailed map of it, you only want to plan the pieces of it that are important to you.
Oh yeah, you don't need actually like every specific detail, and it's actually better if you don't have every specific detail from the get-go.
It's way better if you leave yourself room to add stuff later or to add stuff on the fly.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So when you're first approaching designing a city, there are essentially there's a short list of things I consider. And sometimes I go into more detail with them and sometimes I go into less detail with them, and it entirely depends on the settlement I'm making and what I want out of it. But the list of things I will consider is, why is this city here? So a lot of the times cities and settlements have sprung up either because there's a natural resource there, because it's a natural travel route. So if it's something like near the only ford across a river, near the passes in mountains, or is it a strategic location? Was it built there for defense against something or someone? And that is going to flavor a lot of your choices in the city, because if it's based around the fact that there's a metal resource, that will change the type of industry that's there and the flavor of the city. Or if it's prime farmland, that'll be a totally different flavor. Which leads into the second point. What is the flavor? What makes this city unique? And that could be any number of different things. But it's the types of buildings and architecture, statuary, festivals that are unique to the area, or how they celebrate any particular religious observances, or really anything that makes the traditions and or feel of this city different than the last place they've been.
Another thing that I find helpful, especially if it's a larger city, smaller cities might have this to a lesser degree, but really like a large city, like a trade city or a capital, it really helps to decide not just who lives there, but figure out which factions are vying for control of the city. Any large city is going to have multiple groups trying to run the place, and depending on the factions, that also will help shape architecture, that'll help shape the layout of the city, because you might have districts where each faction is more in control, and that might help inform what is going to be in each city district? Or is
for
there nobody
sure.
in power? Is it a pirate city? Is it one of those, like, wretched hive of scum and villainy cities where
exactly,
it
and
just
that all leads
sprawls
into the
out.
flavor.
Yeah.
But it also leads into my third thing I like to consider, which is conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And the city the conflict in a city or settlement, it can be a conflict in a town. It can be internal, as in the factions and people in the town. What are the conflicts? But it can also be external. What is causing problems for the city as a whole, or for factions who live in the city, something outside. And that can be anything from nature to other factions or other cities or other nations or anything like that. But if you build conflict into your city, it's going to feel more real. It's going to feel more interesting. And it's going to allow you to seed both plot hooks and just interest hooks. People are more interested if there's a sense of there being some conflicts happening behind the scenes.
I'm not sure how comfortable I am with the use of the word seeded. I know it was innocuous.
You can bleep it out. It's cool.
All right. So that'll kind of give you, like, a backdrop to work with for the city. Some very practical things. Make sure that you know where players can stay. That's not just taverns. That's not just inns. One underutilized one that I've used a couple times is a boarding house. They exist. Mm-hmm. They're very fun and funny. It also limits the NPCs that they'll encounter kind of in their home base. So they're more likely to go out and explore. If you want to use the home base as kind of a place where people can find them and kind of have these random encounters, a tavern or a bar is probably going to be a better spot. But if you just want them to have a place to rest, a place for some lighthearted scenes, a boarding house might be the way to go, just because it kind of lets them feel insular and isolated while still having some NPC interactions. So giving your players a place to go is really important. Be ready for that.
Yeah. And the more you play with your group, the more you're going to find out where they look for first. And the places that people look for first are the ones you should have prepared beforehand. The ones that happen as one-offs because of some sort of thing that someone's got a whim or it's part of a quest, and they think, oh, I want to go try and find this specific thing. You can start making those up as you go into the blanks you've left on your map or on your mental map, as it were.
I would say make sure that there's one or two interesting places at least for them to shop. As far as like magical items or supplies or whatever, because they're players. They want to go look at buying cool stuff and worry about being able to afford it. Like that's very classic role playing game, is to go look at all the cool stuff that you can't have, and then pepper in one thing that may not be practical at all, but is very interesting, and have an NPC mention it. I'm thinking specifically in one of our games, I had a bakery that, like, the baker just brought by the food to, like, various places that sell food, and I had a little backstory of the baker had a crush on the woman running a tavern, and so she would always deliver, like, little treats and stuff and not charge her for it, and that was enough of a little hook for one of the players to actually track down the bakery and go and buy like a couple gold pieces worth of baked goods. So
a place is always going to feel more real if you can have people in the background doing stuff that has nothing to do with the PCs. Don't do too much of it, because it's going to feel like too much exposition.
Yeah.
Okay, can we get back to the action? But every once in a while, just pepper in that there's people doing things.
Yeah, and especially if it involves interaction between a couple NPCs, even if it's something really brief, it does make it feel more real.
In fact, it almost feels better if it's brief and you don't even try and explain everything that surrounds it in terms of context. You just...
There's someone else coming out of the shop. Of course there is. You aren't the only customers.
Yeah.
This would be a really sad shop if you were.
Now, once you've actually answered those initial questions, though, what I always do, and I always do this before I make a map, is I make myself what I call a shopping list. And that's going back to the, like, have a place for your people to stay, whether it's boarding houses, inns, or taverns. Essentially, you want to have on your shopping list, at least how I do it, and there is no one right way to do this, is I make a list of districts and neighborhoods that I want, with maybe 1 or 2 characteristics for each. And then I put notable buildings that occur in those districts and neighborhoods, or notable locations. Then I think about a list of notable NPCs and factions and where they are. And I also think about particular adventure possible locations. And that's all stuff I would do before I even thought of starting to make a map, for example, if you want a map. And the interesting thing is that shopping list can just act as your map.
Yeah.
You don't actually have to draw it.
Consider making, like, just graph it out. Like, just write a word and then draw lines to other points of interest in the city. 95% of the buildings in your city, your players aren't going to give a shit about. They're not going to go into every house. They're not going to go into every building. They might go to a cooper's shop. I don't know why they would. A cooper is somebody that makes barrels. But they probably won't. Every large city will have a cooper, probably. But they're not going to go there. So you don't necessarily need to know exactly where it is. You might have a general idea if they ask. But just make like a weird flow chart for your city. Start with what's in the middle and kind of branch out and do it that way. You don't need a specific list because they're not going to remember how many miles away or exactly the street path from one to the other.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's actually better, like, you don't, even if you do map your entire city out in detail, and I mean, when you do it in detail, when I say detail, I mean an actual map with buildings in. I don't mean, I've assigned a purpose to every building I've drawn, because I really recommend against doing that.
Remember, the fewer details you give your players, the fewer details you can screw up later.
And also, just, it's the same way as when you're actually drawing things. People's minds are really good at filling in details for you. If you give people rough sketches, they will fill the detail that's needed, because that's just how our brains work.
You usually draw on it too, Bobby.
What? But, okay, that said, the person who actually answered the question asked the question.
That would be us. We answered the question. I hope.
Yeah, we answered the question. Did say that they enjoy building or drawing large, elaborate maps. So I'm going to give just a really quick overview of the process I use when I do draw maps. I go through all of these questions first. I make my shopping list, as it were, first. And then I draw a general shape for the city. I actually tend to use just a random city generator to give myself a general shape. Mm-hmm. I don't stick to it in particular, but I really enjoy just having that sort of randomness to begin with. And then I draw my streets in. I draw my blocks in. I choose where my really major buildings are going to be. And then I just randomly draw buildings. And then once I'm done drawing those buildings, that's when I actually put in like little markers for the places I've put in my shopping list. Mm-hmm. And everything else on that map is fair game to be anything else when I'm running.
Yeah, don't define
and that's how
right
I
away.
draw and design my cities. I will think about the history of the city a lot of the times. Is it, a walled city? Is it Does it have rivers running through it? That's the sort of thing I'll think about when I'm drawing it. But I don't worry about over-designing it, because most cities, especially if you're playing in a sort of medieval type setting, are not particularly planned.
No.
So stress less about putting your buildings in the exact place they need to be. Just draw them in. Make sure you've got the locations you feel like you need, and give yourself room to improvise and add to later.
Little DM pro tip, if you're improvising a city and you want to sound impressive, just say that it's surrounded by a palisade. Players, for some reason, unless they're either used to you saying it or... Yeah, don't overdo it, but a palisade is just a wooden wall. It's a big wooden log wall, and... Normally, when we describe a wall, they think stone. So describe a palisade. You would be surprised at how often they're like, "Oh, okay, the city's a little bit different," and it takes no effort. I promise. Our next question comes to us from an anonymous Tumblr user again. Is it cool to ask someone to leave a group for behavior that happens out of game? The group I run for has a guy who's a close friend of my friend, and he keeps making inappropriate jokes before and after sessions, not during the game. I've told him I'm not comfortable with it, and he doesn't seem to care. When I've brought up asking him to leave because of it, my friend says it shouldn't matter because it doesn't affect the game. Am I good, or am I overreacting?
You are not overreacting.
That is a dumpster boy.
That's where he lives now. That's his home.
Yes, you are not overreacting.
Yeah. Like, if it affects how comfortable you are.
I am going to point out that Mike did say an inappropriate joke, and the question did actually specify what the joke was, or what the types of jokes were, and can I say no?
Yeah. It jokes about a fairly sensitive topic. I won't say the exact topic because I don't want to have to worry about people listening that it would instantly make uncomfortable. But it is not a topic that you just joke about. And I've died on this hill on Tumblr before, and I don't care. It's an important hill to me. Nobody has the right to sit at your table. Mm-hmm. It is...
Exactly.
It is not your. It is not your responsibility to create a table that anybody has the right to sit at. Yeah. I don't know if this question asker is the GM or not.
No, I think from the context they are, because they said they run the.
Game. So if you're the GM, it's up to you. It's 100% up to you. You don't have to ask anybody. If your friend,
you put so much effort in.
Yeah,
you really don't need someone who's making you uncomfortable at your own table. Like, this is a game you are playing, and you are putting in effort to allow your friends to play games. You don't have to have someone that is detracting from your fun. And can I say something to your friend? What your friend is saying when they're saying it doesn't affect the game is they're saying it doesn't affect my game. It obviously affects yours because you have someone at the table making you uncomfortable.
And let's point out that a role-playing game, I don't care if you're the GM or a player, it's a game. Games are supposed to be fun for everybody. We have this stereotype that the GM is just this world-weary, put-upon person who stresses.
Woe is me.
Yeah. If you're not having fun, you're doing it bad. Like, don't feel bad about doing it that way, but you should be having fun.
Yes.
If you're not having fun with this person at your table, later, dog. Like, it's...
Like, it doesn't even have to be as egregious as this.
Yeah, no question.
And can I say, like, you, from your question, you've already given him the chance to change his behavior, and he hasn't. And quite frankly, you're allowed to have deal breakers where you don't even give people chances to change their behavior. Absolutely. This is 100%. Yeet that boy out of your table.
Like, gaming is hanging out and having fun with your friends, and you can totally be like, hey, I don't want to hang out with you. You're not my friend. Get out of my house.
Emily, you said the word yeet like a 30-year-old.
I know.
We're displaying our ages here, By the way, kids, just dab on the haters. Like,
Yeah. Just FYI, I'm 32. I'm down with those.
Yeah.
kids.
Do you ever want to just like flex on this guy by throwing him straight in a dumpster?
Jesus.
That's very cool.
But
Because honestly, I think you should.
And then actually flex.
Oh yeah, for sure. Show off the guns.
Bobby wasn't here for this, but as part of a game that I ran, and really still run, just it's a different campaign, we actually started with another player who kind of made people uncomfortable, not through like maliciousness or anything, but just some of their game behavior made people uncomfortable. They did the kind of typical, like, asking who's hot in the area. Their gameplay wasn't good. They weren't interested really in being a team member and stuck to things for the aesthetic, even when it negatively impacted everyone else on a consistent basis without contributing positively. That's the caveat. You can do things that negatively impact other players, but you should have... You also should have a positive impact on the party. You should be doing things that are beneficial for the party and not just be dead weight, unless it's been cleared with everybody else and it's a role-playing choice.
And so, like, yeah, exactly that. You can actually leave tables or kick people out of tables, not because they're actually being offensive or terrible people, but because it's not the right game for what they want to do.
Oh yeah, totally. It's
you are allowed to play the games that you want to play, and you're allowed to have the table styles that you want to have. And if someone isn't actually getting on board with that table style, it's not an evil thing to say, hey, you will probably do better at a table where this is the sort of thing they're trying to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah.
Because there's as many different table styles as there are tables
Yeah, like
playing.
if someone wants to like make all these like horrible jokes or do, whatever, do horrible things, and like they don't want to play your game if that's not the game that you're running.
And it's not a comfortable conversation to have with somebody. I will guarantee you it's not comfortable. And even if you don't like the person, it still sucks. But don't hesitate to do it. Like if they're ruining your fun later, like
Oh, and can I also say, like, I know especially in I find in geek circles there. And can I recommend that you look up geek social fallacies? Because I have a feeling you are running into at least 4 of the 5 geek social fallacies here that are making you feel like you can't kick this person out. And you really, really can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Please do, in fact. It'll be better for yourself, and I guarantee that you aren't the only one at the table who's being made uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, remember that not everyone is going to speak up about it, but if you want your table to be welcoming, that's exactly the sort of behavior to get rid of. And you really don't have to be merciful about it. I'm like, no. Just no. Just all kinds of no. Get him out of there. Just because he's not making these jokes in character doesn't mean that he's not making the jokes.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
Your friend is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, our last question comes to us from another Tumblr user. It's pretty short, but it's a really important question, and it's a question that I get a lot running the advice blog that I run. As a DM, how do you make memorable NPCs?
Okay, my first answer is going to be not every NPC has to be memorable.
That's very true.
Absolutely.
Just... You are 100%, I give you license to make throwaway NPCs when you need
Oh,
them.
yeah. That's the spectrum of the NPCs that Emily and I are on. Knowing what I know about Bobby's game, however...
Oh, I have Bobby is very good at memorable NPCs. I have to say, I have to work at them, for sure. But, yeah, like...
Alright, so first thing you do...
Having played in a Bobby
you
game.
accidentally give them
Yes.
a name that's kind of tangentially related to a joke or a pop culture reference. His name is Lydor Filkirk. They're calling him Dr. Phil. He's memorable now. I didn't say
true.
I had good advice.
No, that's fantastic.
Give them...
And that actually also feeds one of my points, is let your players decide which NPCs are
absolutely.
memorable and interesting.
Yeah.
So,
It'll
like,
never be the NPC that you think is going to be memorable. I have written so many really great NPCs that, like, my players have just breezed right through. And then it'll be, like, some weird, just random dude that I had to roll up randomly that they're just like, this is our boy now. We protect him. He is my son. Like,
Yeah.
And the key to getting a reputation for making memorable NPCs is to pay attention to your table, and when they perk up when you describe an NPC, add more to that NPC that you meant as a throwaway.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily depend on your characters thinking, oh, this character that you thought is cool is neat
They
to
won't.
me. Because
They
sometimes they're
absolutely
not
will
seeing
not.
what you see.
They'll call them rude names and then leave.
One of the ways... So, there are a couple things you can do to guarantee a memorable NPC, or to help try to do so. And one of the things is to really understate them at first, but give them a weird thing that they do, and just draw no attention to the weird thing. Describe the weird thing that they do, but
But don't explain it.
Yeah, they will be instantly hooked on the weird thing.
If you can make it seem like there's stuff going on with this character that has nothing to do with the PCs, they're more likely to be interested because it's a mystery to them. It's not something you've told them about the character that's cool. It's is there something more here we could find out?
I think that's actually like how my party got interested in one of my NPCs, Pendulous the Wizard.
Jesus Christ.
Listen.
I love Bobby's
Random
game,
name
by the
generators
way.
are great, but maybe not.
Can
Well,
you
it depends
please...
on the tone of your game,
absolutely.
right? If you're going for a game that is light and you have a lot of laughs, a random name generator that gives you Pendulous the Wizard is perfect.
Can we, Bobby, can you just, like, list off the NPCs that you just know off the top of your head? Because there are some buck wild names
All right,
in there.
so there's a Feral Jake, Hard and Narder, Lydor Filkirk, Dr. Phil, Pendulous the Wizard, and Row Monster. Don't know if you want to bleep that one. Let's see, there's Jasper and Fabian O'Hara, they're married. Let's see, who else is there? There's Lachenta, she died, she was not supposed to die. There's Scrom, the orc captain, there's a whole bunch of, like, orcs I've made, some of which are, like, more memorable than others. One of them wants to be an accountant, but maybe he won't get to now that the players have covered the wizard's tower in giant deadly mushrooms.
So there are other, like, if you're playing a goofy game, absolutely, like, Hard and Narder, Feral Jake, just give them buck wild names.
And names are actually really good ways to set tone. But at the same time, stress out about them a lot less than you want to. Because I guarantee you can make up the most serious names you think are in existence, and your players will find the
draw
funny.
Dr. Phil on your chalkboard wall and just go with it. I'm still mad about Dr. Phil.
My favorite example of that is the Jamedi Kosko from Critical Role, who immediately got labeled as Jumanji Costco. Like, your players are just gonna do that.
Yeah.
Just guaranteed.
It's gonna happen.
Especially if you make up names that aren't
happen.
like traditional names. Like, at some point.
I don't even know
like...
how many names in our DMC game.
Oh, so many.
That Lergalon has been called. And it wasn't even a name that I picked.
Largaloon.
Yeah, it wasn't even a name that
he
I
was
picked.
dead when I named him, okay?
Okay. The funny thing being, though, like, even one of our PC's names.
Aleviel. Oh yeah,
it took us so long to get it right.
It was
that, like,
it was
we started just joking that it was Elevator.
Yeah,
and like so like
it's an honorable family.
People are going to joke around with names that are not familiar.
Oh yeah,
no matter what.
So yeah, that's just a few quick tips on how to make memorable NPCs.
I actually have one other tip I would give.
Yes,
and that's when you're making up an NPC, make up about 3 traits for them when you're describing them. And if you make up 3 traits, your players will remember 1 or 2 of them. If they want to go back to this character. So if you say, for example, the portly sailor with a mustache,
they're going to remember
later,
him as the mustache
your players
boy.
are going to refer to him as the portly sailor or the sailor with a mustache.
Or just mustache.
But either way,
you've given
them yeah, exactly. You've given them something to grab onto, and you've given them a choice of things to decide which one they think is interesting about it.
Pro tip, language.
And that's it.
Language-wise, they're going to remember the last one that you mentioned.
Absolutely. And also,
There's
I have another one, actual serious, instead of just talking about my NPCs.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I have actual serious advice. I prepared for this. Anyway, to give them traits, and also always, like, give them something that they want. It doesn't have to be big, like, they could just want to, like, go home and sleep, because it's been a long day, but, like, it's always a good idea to give them something that's not just like, hi, I'm Store Man, I run the store.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, very good point. Yeah, very
their personality should extend beyond
their jobs.
Yeah, their personality or their desires should extend beyond the context in which the characters meet them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And if you want to give a character, you can always just draw on other characters or real people you know.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
It'll make them feel more real to you, and it'll make them then be portrayed as more real to people. But at the same time, I guarantee you can never guarantee that your players are going to find a specific character interesting.
Also, you don't always have to do a voice. I did one for Pendulous the Wizard, and they really liked him, so now I'm stuck with it.
Yeah, if you can and you are comfortable doing voices, it's really great. I'm not great at voices.
Certainly
and
do
in fact,
accents.
what I'm not great at is consistency. I can certainly do terrible accents.
Yeah, but you do the heck out of them.
I can do a terrible French accent, and
French
I can do a terrible Irish accent.
Well,
and
the Irish is also
kind
of Cockney.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, I tried to do a Cockney accent and it just kept being Irish. And by Irish, I mean a terrible Irish.
Some kind of weird UK blend.
But,
we don't know.
I'm terrible at doing a consistent voice. So I just give them sort of a quality in how they're going to communicate. I don't worry about doing voices. I really, really like it when my DMs do voices. I just know that's not one of the things I'm actually good at doing, especially not good at doing consistently enough to portray a character consistently.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will wrap up our first series of questions and thus our first episode. So thank you all for listening. Like I said, we're going to try and release this once or twice a month. We're going to record these as we get questions. So if you would like to send us a question, you can email me at dmcbeholder@gmail.com, or you can follow me at dungeonmastersconsortium.tumblr.com and send me questions through Tumblr. So thank you all for listening and have a good one.
Bye.
See you, nerds.
yeet that boy out of your table.